All right, guys. This video in response to a question on the Patreon about getting into Fusion, DMR, D-Star, like all these kind of radio proprietary things, and digital repeaters, or talking on digital networks. You guys are starting to ask questions that are really technical, and I would need to do a whole lot more research. And I did before I purchased the Kenwood. I did do some research about D-Star versus Fusion, et cetera, and most of the information that I found was that it's all about the repeater networks in your primary working area, and what is the most prolific. It's kind of like being a Sprint cell phone user. If you live in downtown New York or whatever, and you're living that city life, and you're a straight metropolitan city dweller, having a Sprint plan will save your ass a bunch of money, like a buttload of money. But Sprint's network outside of the major metropolitan areas leaves a lot to be desired. So essentially, from all the ham research that I did about which system, and there was no industry standard that was pushing companies to be interoperable, which standard you went with or whatever was based upon doing research of your local repeater groups on the repeater directories of the internet, and seeing what was more prolific in either your radio clubs in your area, your prepper group, or whatever. So that was kind of what was up. But let's talk about repeaters that are not retransmitting your data on RF, but transferring it over to the internet. Because that's what we got going on. So in your house, for example, if you were to get into this thing where you wanted to have access, to be able to talk to people, whatever, if you start nerding out with, just your ability to maintain comm with people, one of the things that you can do is you can have a box in your house that will take your RF transmission from your little crappy radio, like the Baofeng, and then send it out of the house on your internet. So you would be able to receive and send with a very low power RF transmission in your house around to infinity and beyond. So the question on the Patreon is, what about emergency situations or whatever? Should I be investing in much more capable radios that have all these fancy features if they're tied to the internet? Again, ham radio crash course. K6UDA, all these guys talk about the positives and negatives of ham over the internet, which is getting to be more and more popular because of its user-friendly nature from a younger generation. So a younger generation of people are getting into ham because they can do more with less knowledge and less hardware than the old fuddy-duddy Elmers that bought the sport, that brought it into its being. My personal opinion is that in a natural disaster type of environment, I don't think that the internet is going to be down for very long, or down at all. In a major attack environment, it could. And that was kind of one of the selling points of amateur radio, going back to the Red Scare and the Russians and all, nuclear Armageddon and all of that, was that if major lines of communication were hit, amateur radio operators would be able to talk HF from their homes to their homes. So a dude, in the Cascades that saw Seattle get nuked in the distance but did not die could throw an HF bounce across the United States to a dude in between Baton Rouge and New Orleans that saw both of them get nuked and had not died yet. And so different parts of the country, as they lost all telecommunications in the day, would be able to share and create a common operational picture of exactly how bad the situation that each of the stations had only experienced in their area. So a shared situational awareness, different places around the country checking in and talking about the calamity from their perspective. It's the je ne sais quoi of amateur radio. All right, it's the specialness that was this kind of almost shadow government infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure around our country. And then Al Gore made the internet. Al Gore didn't make the internet. DARPA under the Reagan administration, and all of that stuff, they didn't want these major switching stations that were being run by AT&T and other people, and microwave relay and all of the stuff, the hard stuff that we use to pass info around the country and had been targeted by the Russians. They didn't want the hub in Topeka, Kansas to be a single point of failure. So that's why, the original mesh network, we talk about mesh networks on tactical radios and data communications now, and it's hilarious. We have a mesh network. Yes, you do. And there's another mesh network that we should probably touch at some point if we want our mesh network to be able to talk to anybody. And that other mesh network called the internets, which turned into the World Wide Webs is, okay? It is designed to find a destination point through the path of least resistance. And if it goes down a line and it hits a roadblock, it switches to another line, and it just bounces around, and the data is shared and distributed, and so it's not a yellow brick road to your receiving station. It's infinite possibilities. They're not really infinite if you're a nerd and you know math. Somebody could go out to the 45th power or whatever and tell you exactly how many routes based on IP and max and all that. But you guys get the point. That was the whole point of the internet. If you talk to your local repeater crew, the radio clubs that are responsible for funding and maintaining the repeaters that you're using in your area, those guys will be able to tell you what physical hardware is up on that piece of high ground. Is it solar? Is it hooked to grid power? Your actual repeater for your analog RF. Does it have battery? What does it have? Battery backup? It's trickle charging after if the grid goes down. How long are the batteries? Is there an automatic generator? Does somebody have to hump their ass up there on top of the mountain and start a Honda? How much fuel do you have? That's going to give you an idea for your specific area. We're not talking about digital over the internet. Back to talking about radios on duplex, talking HTs, talking to HTs on repeaters. How long your repeater network will stay alive, sans external power from the grid, is something you need to know. And what actions must be taken. You have the best emergency plan in the world. Nice generator, blah, 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 blah. Underground natural gas line, something, blah, 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 blah. But if there's a human in the loop, then depending on the emergency, that could create its own problem. If we get into an H1N1 pandemic situation and we were to have a massive die-off, by the time that our power grid was compromised, because there are plans in place to protect critical infrastructure people, like sequester them at gunpoint and not let them go home to get infected, and things like that. Billy Bob, that is one of the 5 guys that knows to go up and start the repeater. Billy Bob and the other 4 guys could have all succumbed to H1N1 and are either too sick and are being hospitalized and treated, or have gone home and died of symptoms. So in the pandemic flu, by the time the power grid fails due to lack of human interaction, your radio club's emergency plan to keep that radio repeater going may or may not have also failed. So it's just something for y'all to think about. It would take a lot to bring down the internet. A lot to bring down the internet. That doesn't mean that your connection to the larger internet could not be compromised. So digital radio, for those of y'all that are just tuning in, not the digital over the internet radio is a method of hardware and software by which you transmit from an RF device, a radio. It is received and then by an antenna, and then it goes through essentially a router into the internet by however the receiving station gets on the internet. Okay, cable, fiber, whatever. So your vulnerability in infrastructure is not the internet itself as much as it is your ISP, or the ISP of wherever you're
in half a mile. Keep left at the fork
to the information superhighway. So it's creating points of failure. You have a very, very robust network, but getting the RF output from your HT to the very, very robust
keep left at the fork
is where you are going to potentially run into problems in a critical situation. Conversely, you can also originate signals from a computer and send them through the internet to an antenna array somewhere, and then send them out to people's actual HT radios. The government has been doing this for a long time, guys. Military vets, the days of multiple antennas outside of your tactical operations center for your brigade combat team or whatever, and running thick coax into the TOC and hard mounting speaker boxes that were turned down, and RTOs listen to hand mics, and if the old man actual wanted to get on the radio, he had to go down 2 tiers in the tiered stairs of the Star Wars super room of his TOC, and he had to physically pick up a hand mic and key it up and broadcast out to one of his subordinate commanders in the field. That shit, they don't do that shit no more. It's all goes into multiplexes, server racks, and it's all converted into ones and zeros. And so now there's laptops or whatever at every station in a TOC, and there are software applications that show the actual radio frequencies, either by their net IDs or their actual frequency numbers. It shows signal strength of what's coming in, what's going out, and then using a regular headset, they use the mouse bar, the space bar, or the left mouse clicker to PTT. And so I would receive on my embedder hundreds of miles away from my boss, we'll call it guidance, while I was on a mission. He would be watching or hearing stuff over the radio or whatever, and he would feel that it was his time appropriate as a commander to command something, and he could key up the radio via his computer. It would travel via Cat 5, Cat 6, whatever, and eventually it would make it to an amplified radio transmitter, like physical hardware somewhere on site, and then it would get bounced out over SAT or a UHF line of sight, and then relayed through an aircraft or whatever. So the idea of initiating or terminating RF transmissions via data is not a new concept, but it is reliant on the internet. So you have to, as you're looking at your options, understand, do some research. Y'all need to be doing some research anyway. generally about infrastructure and points of vulnerability. Just so you know, how much water do you have? How far away is your reservoir? What powers the pumps? Are you on nuclear? Are you being fed by a nuclear power plant? Solar. If you have a solar, where are the batteries arrayed at? Where are they storing the excess energy for off-peak hours? All of this is going to let you know about availability to the electrical grid and its primary and secondary and tertiary effects of interruption of consistent clean AC power to all of your analog repeaters, all of your digital repeaters, and all of your gateways onto the information superhighway. Those are your points of vulnerability when you start talking about RF over to digital. And that is just me understanding the theory of how some of these things work with zero specifics. I don't know anything about setting up my Kenwood to talk to the internet. I know I can do it. I bought the radio and it delivered too soon for me taking the entire summer off to even have any attempt to try. I downloaded a repeater list, dumped it into my Kenwood, and started scanning and just listening to what the repeaters in my area, how active they were, how active the people are on there. Started logging some call signs to some people, started hearing locations that I could receive from. The next step will be trying to respond and seeing, can I talk to that repeater that I can hear? Can I physically get there? Do I have to do it from my car with my 48-inch antenna amplified? Can I do it with my HT and a field expedient antenna? Can I do it for my HT with a vehicle mag mount? Can I do it for my HT with a big, stupid, gaudy antenna attached to the actual transmitter of the HT, the RT, the actual handset? That will let me know what the operating range of myself in that area to talk to these perpetuating your signal amplified retransmission sites, whether they be RF retransmission from high ground or transcription over to digital and sent across the internets. But I know a little bit about the internet, and I know a little bit about critical infrastructure. So your problem is essentially going to be regional. And you are going to, without looking like you're a domestic terrorist building a target package, people, you're going to need to do research without making it look like you're targeting critical infrastructure. Because that knowledge is important. It's super important. Especially if you have to conduct yourself in some type of operational act in the future. You can't just run down to the end of the driveway pissed off one day and look to your left and look to your right and see a bunch of other people at the end of the driveway pissed off and grab all of them and say, we're going to go lynch somebody. Your life has to be worth more than that. It's got to be worth more than that. Conscripts that run around with weapons without a plan are called fodder in military jargon. And they're just left to their own devices to cause static and disruption. But they are not important to accomplishing strategic objectives. So, getting back to the interruption of the internet and or power grid, you need to have a good idea about what is going to shut your repeater system in your area down. Is it lack of electricity from the grid? If so, how long? How long do you have on backup? Is it indefinite? Do you have solar? And then if you're operating on a retransmission network that's doing RF but also has a gateway, so somebody has a receiving point and is pumping it into the internet, what's that gateway's infrastructure? Does it have backup power? Is it automatic? Is it EMP shielded? Is it whatever? Whatever. And these things could be as simple as, tornadoes or hurricanes. New Orleans had repeaters that never went offline. I know that for a fact. My grandfather was a real big CB nerd. And one of my uncles followed in his footsteps, got into amateur radio very young. Super, super smart electrical dude, my uncle. And when my mom made her incursion back into New Orleans, she had been away on vacation when Katrina hit. So she left, packed for vacation, and the hurricane event happened while she was in the United Kingdom. So birth certificates, emergency documents, important family photos, whatever, precious jewelry, whatever mom considers important was left behind in New Orleans. And so she had to go back in to the post-Katrina wasteland and try to find out if her apartment survived, if it was flooded, if it had been looted, and then get her stuff. So she made a thunder run into the city, bullshitted her way past the National Guard with her hospital credentials and wearing a set of scrubs and armed with a .38 and a handy-talkie that my uncle gave her because he had already confirmed that the New Orleans repeater was still up. And that was her emergency comms to call my uncle back outside of Baton Rouge in the event in New Orleans over a cycle of darkness. The plan was for her to get in shortly after sunup, load everything she could into a vehicle, and get out before sundown, circumventing the FEMA and government checkpoints. Plan worked. My point is that even in a cat whatever hurricane, the repeater did not physically get blowed over, and it either had a battery backup or a generator backup, and a generator backup with enough fuel that the amp on the repeater was never lost it. And there might have been, multiple repeaters in New Orleans, and maybe several of them did go down. But there was a workable HT repeater in New Orleans post-Katrina. Anecdotal, based on my family doing hood rat shit, trying to get their stuff back. So there you go. There's my 30-minute response to your question about should you even mess with digital in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, or whatever your question was. Just food for thought. I got 6 hours on the road driving to my next client, and since I did not get to see you guys enough this summer, and this is kind of such a hot topic, I don't know how. Well, I don't know why we're having a discussion on Chuck's gun Patreon. I mean, I guess it's not Chuck's gun Patreon, it's Chuck's whatever Patreon, but there's just so many people that are smarter than me about this subject matter. Maybe they're not breaking it down into stupid layman's terms or whatever. Like I said, I'd like to reach out to Josh because he seems like he's kind of down with the self-defense life, at least personal responsibility and accountability life. Like to maybe set up a time for him to do a live Q&A where you guys can dial in, and he and I'll have a panel, and we can talk about some of this stuff. I personally think it probably can't get knocked out in a single live chat. But if he's down, I'm down. I want the knowledge, and I want you guys to have the knowledge. And I don't care that it's not me that necessarily provides the knowledge. So you really didn't get any definitive answers in this video. I'm just pointing you guys in the direction of the questions you should be asking and researching. That is what is, I'm focusing your search, your continued search for knowledge. And in this case, it just happens to be reference. It is making my HT talk to the internets even worth my time. So there you go, Chuck from Presscheck Consulting, somewhere in Central Virginia, northbound on a Monday. I will talk to you guys later.